My name is Daniel, an amateur photographer. My passion is capturing images of abandoned places, the ruins of civilization. Every crack in a wall, every peeling layer of paint tells a story. That weekend, I was on a solo hiking trip deep in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, a part of the vast Appalachian range. That afternoon, the sky suddenly changed. From a clear blue, it turned to a steely gray in less than an hour. The wind began to howl through the trees, and the first raindrops, heavy and cold, began to fall. I knew I couldn't make it back to my car in time. I was trapped in the middle of an approaching thunderstorm. I frantically looked for a shelter. And then, through a curtain of rain that was growing thicker by the second, I saw it. Sitting in the middle of a forest clearing was a small wooden church. It was old, the white paint almost completely peeled away, revealing the grayed wood beneath. Its small bell tower tilted to one side, looking as if it was about to collapse. It looked both like a sanctuary and a tomb. Having no other choice, I ran towards it. The heavy wooden double doors were unlocked. I pushed them open with all my might, squeezed inside, and slammed them shut behind me to block out the howling wind. Inside, the air was heavy and dead silent. A weighted silence, a complete contrast to the raging storm outside. The smell of damp, decay, and the musty paper of old hymnals filled my nostrils. Dim light filtered through the dusty stained glass windows, painting bizarre streaks of color across the empty rows of pews. I sat down in a back pew, feeling a sense of profane peace. I was the only one in this forgotten house of God. I decided to stay here and wait out the storm, maybe even get a little sleep. I don't know how long I slept. I wasn't woken by the thunder, but by another sound, a sound that simply could not exist. Bongai! A single church bell toll ringing out right above my head, so loud and sharp it hurt my ears. The entire building vibrated. I could feel the vibration travel through the wood of the pew I was sitting on. I leaped to my feet, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. Who? Who rang the bell? The bell tolled again, a second time, then a third, mournful and slow. Before falling silent, I was wide awake now, and a chilling fear began to creep in. I was not alone. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the strong wind shaking the old bell. But I knew that was a lie. And then I heard a long, horrifying creak. The sound of the two heavy front doors being slowly pushed open. I quickly ducked behind my pew, daring only to peek through the small gap. The doors swung wide open, letting in a gust of wind and rain. And then, they began to walk in. Not one person, but many. I heard their footsteps, heavy and shuffling on the wooden floor. The sound of rainwater dripping from their clothes onto the floorboards. But there were no voices, no whispers, no coughs. Just the sound of shuffling feet and dripping water. I curled up into a ball, holding my breath. A congregation was entering the church in the middle of a thunderstorm at midnight. From my hiding spot, I watched them. One by one, they silently walked in and sat down in the pews. They were shadows, silhouettes in the dim light cast by the lightning flashes outside. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I could see their clothes. Old-fashioned, outdated outfits, all soaking wet. A man in an old-style suit. A woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat. A small child in a long dress. The church began to fill up. Dozens of figures, all sitting upright, perfectly still. The most terrifying thing was their silence. No one spoke to anyone else. No one looked around. All of them, without exception, were staring straight ahead at the empty pulpit and altar. They were waiting. That silence was more terrifying than any scream. The air in the church grew cold and suffocating. I felt like a trespasser, an outsider who had accidentally stumbled upon a secret service. All I could do was pray that they wouldn't discover me. I was so focused on the scene that I didn't notice a figure had sat down in the pew directly in front of mine. It was so close I could smell the damp earth and the scent of old wet clothes. I held my breath, not daring to move, and then the figure slowly turned its head. A slow, almost impossible movement. A flash of lightning lit up the church from outside, illuminating the figure's face for a single moment. It was a woman. Her skin was pale and wrinkled like wax paper. Her hair was matted to her face, but the most horrifying part was her eyes. They were just two dark, empty sockets, and they were staring right at me. I almost screamed, quickly clamping my hand over my mouth. The woman seemed uninterested in my presence. After staring at me for a few seconds, she slowly turned her head back to the front, continuing her silent wait. But I knew I had been discovered. I was no longer an invisible observer. I had become a part of this service. I had to get out. At that exact moment, a deafening clap of thunder shook the entire church. Simultaneously with the thunder, a figure suddenly appeared at the pulpit. It didn't walk out from a door. It simply materialized there. A tall, gaunt figure dressed in the black robes of a pastor. But its face was shrouded in a deep shadow, impossible to see. It slowly raised its two long, bony arms. Instantly, all the figures in the church rose to their feet in unison. A single, coordinated movement without a single sound, like a legion of puppets. And then all of them at the same time turned their heads. Dozens of pairs of black, empty sockets were now staring directly at me. That was when I moved. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I burst out from my hiding place, not running for the main entrance, but for a small side door I had noticed earlier near the altar. I knocked over pews, the sound of splintering wood echoing unnaturally in the dead silence. I didn't hear them chasing me, but I could feel their eyes, all of their eyes, fixed on my back. I slammed into the side door. Luckily, it wasn't locked. I threw it open and ran out, back into the raging storm. I didn't care about the rain or the thunder anymore. I just ran for my life into the dark forest, not daring to look back. I ran without stopping until dawn, when I collapsed from exhaustion on a dirt road. I've told a few friends the whole story. They laughed and thought it was an interesting tale, but I know what I saw. It was real. They had no intention of harming me. I was just an unwilling audience. I had accidentally stumbled into their church on their night of worship. A congregation of the lost souls of the dead still gathering on every stormy night to wait for a sermon from a faceless pastor, a service that has been repeating in silence for 100 years. My name is Michael, a freelance writer. The noisy and hurried life of the city had worn me down. So when I inherited an old plot of land from a distant great uncle in the foothills of eastern Kentucky, I took it as a sign, a chance to escape, to get back to basics. The property was just as I had imagined, a small wooden house in need of repair, a few acres of land being reclaimed by weeds, and an almost absolute silence. But the thing that dominated the entire property, both physically and spiritually, was the old stone well in the backyard. It was unlike any well I had ever seen. It was built from large moss-covered stones, and its opening was not covered by a normal wooden lid, but by a giant slab of granite, one that looked like it weighed a ton. It seemed as if someone had sealed it shut a very long time ago. A few days after I moved in, a neighbor stopped by. His name was Cletus, an elderly, skinny man with wrinkled skin and eyes that had seen too much. He brought me some vegetables and looked around the property. "That well?" he said, his voice deep and a little distant. "It's been there since my great-granddaddy's time. Folk round here say it's a thin place, a spot where the ground ain't quite solid between this world and somewhere else." He looked directly into my eyes. "We have a rule in these parts. Don't make loud noises near that well. And whatever you do, don't you ever call down into it. You just leave it be." I nodded seriously, but inwardly I thought it was just a quaint folk tale. I had no idea that his warning wasn't a superstition. It was a containment procedure. The next few days I started the work of cleaning up, but that well always had a strange pull. It was a silent, powerful presence. Sometimes I would find myself just standing there, staring at the granite slab, trying to imagine the deep darkness beneath. I noticed there were a few small cracks between the slab and the stone wall, not big enough to see through, but perhaps big enough for sound to pass. One afternoon, after a few hours of tiring work, my skepticism and a bit of youthful audacity got the better of me. I decided to test it, just once. To prove to myself that Cletus was just a superstitious old man, I went to the edge of the well, feeling my heart beat a little faster. I knelt down, putting my mouth close to one of the largest cracks. "Hello?" I called down, my voice a bit playful. "Anyone down there?" At first, nothing, but then from deep within the earth, an echo answered back. It was my own voice. "Hello? Anyone down there?" But it sounded deep and muffled, as if it had passed through a thick layer of water. I laughed, feeling silly. I was about to walk away. Just as I turned my back, another sound, a completely different sound, slipped through the crack. A whisper. Very faint, clear, and unmistakably the voice of a young child. It spoke only one word. "Hello?" My entire body froze. The blood in my veins felt like it had turned to ice. That wasn't an echo. An echo can't change its voice. Someone or something was down there, and it had just answered me. I ran into the house and locked the door. I couldn't sleep that whole night, but as the initial fear subsided, it was replaced by a morbid curiosity. That voice was so real, so clear. It didn't sound threatening. It sounded lonely. The next day, I couldn't resist. I went back to the well. My hands were trembling. I knelt down again and whispered into the crack. Is anyone there?" A long silence stretched. I almost thought I had imagined the whole thing. And then, the voice replied, still faint and clear. "It's so dark down here." My heart ached. I began a conversation, a forbidden conversation with an unknown thing deep in the earth. "What's your name?" I asked. "Johnny." "How long have you been down there?" "Forever." Each of its answers was simple, innocent, and made the hair on my neck stand up even more. I felt a strange sense of pity. Maybe Cletus's rule was wrong. Maybe this boy just needed a friend. I spent that whole afternoon talking to Johnny. I told him about the world above, about the sun, about the trees. He just listened, occasionally replying with simple questions. I asked him one last question. "What do you do down there alone all day?" Johnny's voice replied, still innocent. "I wait." A moment of silence. I was about to ask what he was waiting for when another sound suddenly erupted from the crack. A sound that was not Johnny's. A growl. Deep, guttural, and bestial. A growl that came from the throat of some large creature right underneath the boy's voice. I leaped backward, utterly terrified. I understood. Johnny wasn't alone down there. I understood the horrifying truth. That well didn't just contain a spirit, it was a trap. And I had been talking to the bait for the past 2 days. I had no courage left. I ran into the house, hastily throwing my most essential belongings into a bag. I was leaving this place. Immediately, I would drive through the night to get away from here. As I was frantically tossing my things into my car, it was beginning to get dark. I glanced at the well one last time just to make sure everything was okay. And my heart stopped beating. The granite slab. The giant 1-ton slab of granite had been moved. It had been pushed aside a few inches, creating a pitch-black, gaping opening. I couldn't believe my eyes. I stood there, frozen, staring at that gap. And then, from that black opening, Johnny's voice rang out. This time, it was no longer a faint whisper. It was a clear, cheerful call that echoed across the backyard. A call that made me sick to my stomach. "I'm coming out to play now, Michael. Won't you come and play with me?" And right after that sweet voice came the familiar growl. Louder this time, closer and full of hunger. I didn't wait to see what would crawl out of that opening. I jumped into my car, started the engine, and floored the gas pedal. I sped down the dirt road, not daring to look in my rearview mirror. The next morning, I drove to Cletus's house, my face still pale with shock. I told him the whole story. Cletus showed no surprise. He just sighed, his face etched with weariness and sorrow. "I warned you, son," he said. "That well, it collects things. It's been here for hundreds of years and many people have vanished near it. But the most recent story, the most tragic, was the Millers, the family who owned the property before you. He told me that just over 10 years ago, their little boy, a child named Johnny Miller, had gone missing while playing in the backyard. They never found him. His mother swore she heard him whispering from the well for days afterward, but no one believed her. Eventually, they sealed the well and sold the house. I sat there speechless. Now I understood. I hadn't just been talking to a ghost. I had been talking to the bait of something far more ancient and malevolent. Something that had stolen the voice of a dead child to lure new victims. And I, in my foolishness, had not only answered it. I had unsealed his tomb and I had let the hunter out.